Ghosts have somehow moved into my day.
Hello everyone, Pamela Zero here. Welcome to Duck Duck Goose, a podcast about the Visitor series. This episode includes chapters 19 and 20 of the book Osei. Thanks for coming along on Osei's journey. Chapter 19, Corius, Studio 9, Hutlam. Corius sat in his seat on the stage carefully, determined not to crease his outfit. A bank of bright lights shone on him, while his audience of Punj couples had more diffused, flattering lighting. It was always a bit more difficult to shoot with a live audience, but Corius loved the energy it brought to his show. He glanced over at his wife in her usual spot on the side of the stage. Today's guests were a huge risk. The visitors were a popular subject, but Punj society was notoriously diffident to anything off-planet, and the audience came more to be seen than to actually watch his show. Hyras smiled at him and breathed deeply, in and out. Corius mimicked her actions and tried to focus. If the show failed, he'd be right where he was now, an aged has-been with only moments of glory. If it succeeded, he'd be back on top for just one more moment, one last great story. The show rarely had many people in attendance, but word had spread quickly about mysterious guests, and the seats were full today. The theater was laid out in a traditional fashion, with a stage shaped in a half circle, and the audience seated at tall tables, so those with more ornate ensembles could stand if they wanted. The theater manager was an expert at placing the various couples at tables that would show their clothing in the best possible light. Osei and Sai had come, and were at a table near the front of the audience at the request of Corius. Sai wore the simple white tunic and pants of a lucent, and Osei was in all black. If nothing else, they provided a rest for the eyes compared to the ornate finery of the couples seated around them. Corius felt chilly and considered wearing a wrap during the show. He decided against it, as he wanted to show off his new vest, a gift from Hyras for their 70th anniversary. It shone a muted pink and sunny yellow. Voices murmured and drinks clinked as people positioned themselves and prepared for the show to start. Corius smiled to himself as he felt butterflies in his stomach. That was always a good sign. The house lights dimmed and the stage lights got even brighter. Corius stood up and walked to the front center of the stage. My dear friends, thank you for coming. Today's show is about courage and character. His shoulders relaxed as his voice rolled out, solid as ever. Tell me, what would you do if you found yourself in the future? Corius swept his gaze across the audience. Not a week from now, not a cycle from now, but hundreds of thousands of cycles in the future. Everyone you know now is gone. Everything you have now is gone. You had no warning. There was no time to say goodbye. Corius paused, hearing the audience murmur to each other. Now imagine the future you find yourself in is horrid, cold, dark, damp. You're experimented on, you're tortured, you're starved. The murmurs grew louder, with several audience members fanning themselves dramatically and a few claiming to feel faint. Tell me, how would you react? Would you lose your ability to think clearly? Would you regress to being a child again? Would you curl up in a ball and pretend the new world did not exist? Who would you become, bent under the pressure of your new reality? Would you lose your kindness, your compassion, your sense of fairness or justice? Corius paused and heard only silence. Or would you rise to the occasion? Would you endure and persevere? Would you fight until you won your freedom? He turned and gestured to the side of the stage. My dear friends, may I present our guests, Ambassador Ellanen Smith and her daughter, Ambassador Duck. The audience stood as one, all of them craning to catch their first glimpse of the guests. The images being beamed out by the 3 cameras in the theater showed the side of the stage, the audience tense with anticipation, and Corius, his hand outstretched. Those watching at home leaned forward in their seats. Ellanen and Duck walked on stage, Duck squinting in the bright light. Ellanen was wearing her skin suit molded into a long dress that showed her green and yellow colors. Duck was wearing a Punj-style child's dress. The many layers of her dress shifted into radiant colors under the bright stage lights. "Welcome. Please have a seat." Corius gestured to a small sofa. That and his chair were the only two things on the stage. "Thank you," said Ellanen. She was holding Duck's hand and tugged on it gently to get her to come over to the couch. Duck was staring intently at something on the side of the stage as the audience resumed their poses. "Ambassador Duck, how nice to see you," said Corius, trying to catch her attention. "Hello, my name is Duck, hello!" Duck spoke the last greeting out into the audience, her hand shading her eyes. She turned to face her host. "Mr. Corius, do you see the lady over there?" Duck pointed to Hyris seated on the side of the stage. "She's very beautiful. Do you see her hat?" Corius beamed and reached out to his wife, who came out on stage. "May I introduce my life mate, Lady Hyris? Darling, this is Ambassadors Smith and Duck." Duck stood still with her eyes wide as Hyris glided over and took her husband's hand. "Ambassador Smith, Ambassador Duck." Hyris kneeled by Duck and smiled at her, still holding her husband's hand as she lowered her frail body to one knee. "How kind you are to say such lovely things." Duck's eyes got even wider and she whispered softly, "Your hat is pretty." The audience sighed in unison and there was a smattering of applause. Corius looked at Ellanen, wondering if she had coached her daughter. There was no better way to win over a Punj than to compliment their partner. He squeezed his wife's hands as she pulled herself up gracefully. She smiled at him, nodded her head to the audience, then glided off the stage. "Master Corius, thank you for having us on your show. Duck and I are pleased to be here," said Ellanen, sitting down on the couch along with Duck. "It is my pleasure to have you both," said Corius. "I must confess I'm surprised you are here. You visitors have been reclusive on that planet of yours." Ellanen smiled. "Yes, well, we have focused on building our new home. We are settled in now. However, one issue has risen to the surface, and I'm hoping I can share a plan we have with you and see if you think it might work." Corius felt a flutter of curiosity. "Of course." "As you know, there are 129 visitors. Well, it turns out that 129 is not a lot. After a cycle spent making ourselves at home, we found that we lacked only one thing: the company of non-visitors." "Really?" Corius raised an eyebrow. "Ambassador Duck, are you lonely on Thrid?" Duck shook her head. "No, I have a friend called Near, and he can dig really well, and I have my family. I miss some of my friends from the temple, and I miss being in class." She swung her feet slightly. "Some of my aunts are lonely, though, and they have no family other than the one you get by being a visitor." "Are your aunts seeking suitors?" Corius shifted his gaze to Ellanen. "Well, in a way, yes," Ellanen replied. "We have food, shelter, friendship, and purpose. Some of us, however, don't have families. Sometimes, once basic needs are met, people want to form bonds and create a family. Not everyone, but enough for us to realize that we need to reach out." "Well, it would be complicated, would it not?" said Corius. "Where would they live? Would a visitor be able to adopt to the customs of another race after all the adjusting they've already had to do?" Ellanen nodded. "We don't know, but we're starting up a monthly event at the Skylab space station for those interested in meeting and mingling with visitors in a social setting. Perhaps the interactions there will eliminate both the issues and the solutions raised by visitors expanding their horizons." "There will be ice cream and probably cookies," said Duck. "It sounds wonderful. Tell me, Ambassador Duck, will you be looking for a suitor at these events?" Corius asked with a smile on his face and a lilt in his voice. The audience held its breath. In Punj culture, girls Duck's age already accepted threads. Duck tilted her head. "I don't think so. I'm still figuring stuff out. I wasn't really done when I got brought here, and in Burston it was too scary to think. I'm still too little." Ellanen smiled at her daughter. "Well said, honey. You take your time." She looked at Corius. Duck has lived more in her short life than most people do in their whole lives. We're letting her set the pace when it comes to growing up. Corius nodded. That is a wise approach. Tell me, though, Ambassador Smith, how many non-visitors do you think will be looking to participate in these Skylab events? I suppose that will depend on the number of visitors that want to attend. Probably a dozen or so. Those wishing to come can reach out to me or Ambassador Magdalena Suarez, the mayor of our little town on Thread. Once the event is full, we'll start a list for the next one. Corius turned to his audience. Well, my dear friends, I suggest you reach out sooner rather than later. And now, shall we take a few moments to refresh ourselves? The cameras clicked off and Corius turned back to his guests. We're scheduled for a quick break here. May I get you some refreshments while we reset the cameras? I usually change, and the audience gets a few minutes to stretch their legs. The break was short. Corius disappeared, then emerged in a completely new outfit, this one muted gold and burgundy. He mingled with the audience for a few minutes, complimenting ensembles and graciously deflecting all praise to the visitors. The house lights dimmed, and Corius made his way back to the stage. Gentle people, thank you again for honoring us with your presence. Corius sat down in his chair and addressed Ellanen. As you know, there was a rather unpleasant event at the Lucent Sanctuary recently. It's my understanding that the Visitor Defense Team lent its expertise to the Punjar security forces. What exactly happened? Oh, goodness, I'm sure you folks here on Punjar know more about it than I do. Ellanen had been a beauty queen back on Earth before she had been pulled forward, and she hadn't lost her ability to be charmingly uncooperative. I read in your paper that it was a race called the Cura? Well, surely, since you're a member of the Visitor Defense Team yourself, you're able to give us a tiny bit of inside information. I actually was not a part of that mission, said Ellanen. Duck and I were unable to participate, though after seeing all the lovely people here, I regret not being able to help personally. Ambassador Duck, you weren't able to go? Asked Corius, turning his attention to her. No, I didn't go because I had to finish my homework, and it was going to be very rough and tumble, but my Auntie Fran was there, and she said that everyone was very brave. Did she? What else did she say? Duck shrugged. I don't remember much. It was a busy day, and we had made great discoveries in the dirt of Dome 1. But we can ask her. Do you want to ask her? Of course, I'd be happy to talk with your Auntie Fran. Corius saw Ellanen stiffen, but he pressed onward. Can we contact her via comm? We can, but she's here, so we can just ask her. She's here? Corius blinked, ruining his shot for a moment. He peered out into the audience. I'm so sorry, I don't see her. Duck used her finger to draw a circle in the air and made a slash through it. She signed a few more gestures, then folded her hands in her lap. The audience gasped as Fran came out of phase, standing behind the couch. Her blacked-out skin suit covered her head completely. The angles of her face under the suit looked demonic. Corius froze. Only his eyes moved, panning over Fran as she rested her hands on Duck's shoulders. The audience was motionless. Fran's skin suit slid down to reveal her face. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and the bright stage lights made her skin almost translucent. She bowed her head to the audience, and then gave a small smile to Corius. Auntie Fran, Mr. Corius has questions for you. Duck's small voice floated out over the still air of the studio. The show will run long tonight, Corius thought to himself. What can I possibly say to her? To that? He saw Hyris stand up side stage, her hands crossed over her heart. He breathed in her support. Corius gestured to the couch. Please, Ambassador, join us. Thank you. Fran hopped over the back of the couch and sat next to Duck in one fluid motion. The audience was still. How wonderful that you're here, chatted Corius amiably. His heart was pounding. Can I get you anything? No, thank you. Duck said that you had some questions. Indeed. Corius took a deep breath. We were wondering about the events at the Lucent Sanctuary. Duck mentioned that you were there as part of the Visitor Defense Team when the Cura were subdued. Fran nodded. We don't usually discuss who's on the team for specific missions, but yes, I was there. And what role did you play? Asked Corius. Scout, replied Fran. Scout? Scouts investigate the situation and report back to leadership, in this case the Punjar security forces. Fran's voice was clear and level. What was that like? Were you in phase? Corius leaned forward. Yes, it was difficult. There were Lucents at risk and a lot of heavily armed Kira. But you were in phase, so no real danger. Corius's voice trailed off as he settled back into his chair. Fran shrugged. Being in phase does not remove one's heart, or one's empathy, or one's compassion. Seeing people in danger, lives being threatened, makes for a bit of a nightmare. She folded her hands in her lap. I was there as a scout, so I had to focus on gathering information rather than helping those I saw at risk. I am lucky that I was able to see what was happening, report back, and then return before any more innocent people were hurt. Corius tilted his head slightly. This was not the conversation he thought they would be having. He had expected a discussion of how terrible the Kira were, how mighty the defense team was, and how thoroughly the VDT had decimated the enemy. This almost philosophical view was surprising. He fired off questions. Ambassador Knott, what is it like to phase, to see the world slow down around you, to be able to run circles around those in regular time, to know that you cannot be touched, that you're safe no matter what weapon is used against you? Fran gave a tight smile, and her hands clenched each other. It's lonely. It's isolating. Phasing had saved my life several times, and I'm glad I have the skill. But when all is said and done, it's a silent, bitterly cold experience that leaves one longing for contact with others. There were murmurs from the audience. Corius felt as if he were being carried down a raging river, a leaf floating on the turbulent emotions from his audience. He leaned forward again. He could feel the weight of what he wanted to ask. I heard a story. I'm not sure if it's true. May I ask you something personal? Fran raised an eyebrow. You can ask her, but she might not answer, Duck interjected. She gets not to answer if she doesn't want to. Sometimes I don't want to answer, and Mama too says I don't have to. Duck reached out and took Fran's hand. Fair enough. Corius took a deep breath. I heard that you had a family back on Earth, that you were married and had a son. Fran's face stayed still as stone. Ellanen reached over and added her hand on top of Duck's. The room rang with silence. Fran swallowed. Yes. Do you miss him, your son? Corius kept his voice neutral. Yes, answered Fran. How old was he when you left? 6. Old enough to remember you. Yes. What was his name? Fran's face contorted slightly. Peter. What was he like? Wild. Sweet. Kind. Tears filled Fran's eyes. He would spend hours drawing everything and anything. He liked mushrooms and pizza. She took a deep breath. I lost a lot when I was pulled forward. I've been able to find replacements for almost everything. There are clothes here, places to live, there are jobs, things to eat, and ways to be entertained. There's art. She turned and smiled through her tears at Duck. I've even found a new and wonderful family. But there's no way to replace my son. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Losing him is the tragedy of my life. Corius nodded. He waited, feeling the full force of Fran's grief roll out over the audience. He stood and bowed deeply to the visitors on the couch. My dear friends, I would like to thank Ambassador Smith, Duck, and Knott for taking the time to talk with us today. He turned to the audience and walked to the edge of the stage. Today's show has been about courage and character. Corius looked out into the bright lights. He couldn't see the audience clearly, but he could feel them. Tell me, what would you do if you found yourself in the future? Not a week from now, not a cycle from now, but hundreds of thousands of cycles in the future. You have left everything, everyone behind. Corius paused for a moment, then closed his eyes and bowed his head. and there was no time to say goodbye. Chapter 20. Duck, Dome 1, Thrid. The team of Gristle stood around in the middle of a newly plowed field, drinking hot Ariv, a drink made from a bitter root. They were waiting for Uret, the dig team lead, to finish the calculations. He had approximated the location of the metal tunnel that Neo had found. The team's task that day was to dig a new, more accessible route to the tunnel. Near and Duck stood at a safe distance, both of them hopping from foot to foot. The dig team had gifted their labor as a present to Near for his 7th cycle celebration, and the two children were giddy with excitement. Uret took one more look at his numbers and then strode over to a spot that looked just like any other. Here. The dig team wasted no time. They formed a 4-meter wide circle with the spot as the center and started digging, their huge claws fully extended. The Gristle team dug around the edge of an invisible circle, digging in towards the center, then out again to the edge as they moved. As soon as the excavated dirt from the person in front hit the ground, it was packed by the next Gristle's massive feet into the outer wall. Uret joined the diggers and dirt flew from his claws. The pit they were making stayed about 4 meters across, and Duck wondered how they would get out when they got to the bottom. "How long do you think it will take?" whispered Duck to Near. "About an hour, hour and a half, unless they hit water or a pocket." "Dirt has pockets?" Duck's mind raced, trying to figure out what one would keep in a pocket of dirt. "Big gaps, where there's no dirt. Sometimes there is gas, or sometimes there is nothing. Dirt is fun. There are a lot of surprises." "Is that why you don't use machinery to dig?" asked Duck. Near looked at Duck, the fur around his neck flattened. "Of course we use machinery to dig. There is too much digging for us to manage it all by hand. Have you seen the big claws over in Dome 2? "Yeah. Then why is the team digging here by hand?" wondered Duck. "There are many reasons. The machinery is over in Dome 2. It is not that big of a dig. We are in Dome 1. There are people living here, so it's always better to be cautious and dig slowly by hand, just in case," replied Near. "This is slowly?" Duck's eyes were wide as she looked at the hole. Near nodded. "This is slowly." The team had dug themselves out of sight, and both Near and Duck tiptoed forward to see what was happening in the pit. The team was a good 4 meters down, moving quickly, dirt flying. "What should we do now?" asked Duck. "Watch, so we can learn," said Near, his eyes locked on the team. "We can sit on the edge here if we want." Duck plopped down at the edge of the pit and let her feet dangle down. She tried to think of how deep below them the middle tunnel was, but she had no idea. Near's tunnel had sloped gently most of the time, and judging depth was tricky if one wasn't a Gristle. Near sat down next to her, his claws extended slightly. "How far do they have to dig?" asked Duck. 12 meters, replied Near. Duck thought carefully. "How will they get back up once they get to the bottom?" "They are packing dirt on the way down into a ramp that winds back up to the top," said Near. Duck nodded. She reached into the pocket of her faded dress and pulled out her cards. "I think I have a card with a digging race on it." She shuffled through the cards, pulling one out. "See? This one that looks like a worm." She slowly read the card. "It says here that these guys eat dirt as they move through it. Ew!" Duck made a face, then looked at the ground next to her. She picked up a bit of soil and sniffed it. "Some dirt tastes good, but it's just the minerals in it," said Near. "That's a neat card. Want to trade?" "Did you bring your cards?" asked Duck. "I did." He dug in his waist belt and brought out a pile of cards, balancing them on one furry palm. "I have a digging race too. Mine looks like a beetle." He shuffled through his deck and held up a card. "Wow!" exclaimed Duck. "Look how shiny it is. Is it made of gold?" "It's the head beetle. All the other beetles chew up ore and then spit it out onto this guy, and he gets a gold coat," said Near. "It makes him anonymous, because it covers up the markings on his shell. No one outside the beetle world knows his real name." "Why not? Why does he have to be a secret person?" asked Duck. "Because he's a symbol. My dad says symbols have more power than a person," replied Near. "Besides, if people knew who he was, everyone would pester him all the time." Duck was silent. She looked through her cards. "Near?" Near looked at Duck. You okay? Is that really true? Symbols have more power than a person? Duck was staring at her cards, slowly looking at them one at a time. Maybe the first is just a symbol, and that's why the service wants the first, so they can have the symbol power. I don't know. They seem to want the person to do something, I think. Well, what if the person doesn't know what to do? What if the first doesn't know how to make the prophecy work? Near thought for a moment. Duck, I'm not sure if their prophecy's real. How can the service know about it but not know how to make it work? How would the first even know if they're a visitor? You guys are from the past. He fell silent. Duck's eyes filled with tears. Near, don't ask me how I know, but it's real. I think it's real. She dashed the tears away. Promise you won't tell anyone, she whispered, her voice low and rough. Blinking slowly, Near stared at Duck. I promise. Duck smiled softly and handed Near the card with the worm on it. He took it and handed her back the gold beetle card. The two children sat in silence as the dig team slowly worked their way lower into the dirt of Dome 1. Fran, Dome 1, Thrid. Fran, we don't have time. David was almost running, trying to keep up with Fran as she strode across the empty field. Make time. You need to see this. Everyone needs to see this. Fran kept walking. Auntie Fran, are you here to see the great discovery? Duck ran up with Near lumbering behind. Absolutely, said Fran, kneeling to hug Duck. She looked closely at her face. The child had been crying. How goes the world, Duck? Duck smiled, her eyes threatening tears. I am enduring, Auntie Fran. May I assist in any way? Asked Fran. She watched as Duck shook her head no. Is it something bigger than you? Too big to fix, said Duck. And we get to go see the metal room again, and there's no time for lollygagging. Fran nodded, then stood up, offering one hand to Duck and one to Near. Shall we? Ellanen and Maggie were up ahead, standing in a cluster of visitors and gristle. They were staring down a shaft in the ground. Fran didn't break her stride when she reached the edge of the pit, finding the edge of the ramp and starting down without pause. David shook his head and followed her. Come on, everybody. The sooner we see what this is, the sooner we'll be able to get back to work, called David. The small crowd started down the ramp, everyone speaking in hushed tones. When they reached the bottom, the roof of the metal tunnel had been sliced open and pulled back, the ramp continuing down. In a moment, they were at the doors of the bunker. The Gristle dig team had widened the area in front of the double doors, and everyone packed in as Uret, the team lead, motioned to Near to speak. Hello, everyone. My name is Near. His voice was loud in the small underground space. This is the bunker. I found it, and then Duck and Fran came with me, and we went inside. We think it is a Thridian building. He stopped and darted a glance at Duck. We want to explore the whole thing. We think it is very big. This might be dangerous. Near stepped forward and pushed one of the doors open. He walked into the darkness, and a moment later, the lights inside the bunker came on. Those waiting outside slowly entered, looking around at the rows of crumbling machines. Near and Duck went to the set of doors on the inside wall and waited, Duck tapping one foot for everyone to finish looking at the first room. Fran was peering at the panel on the wall with all the dials. She finally reached out and turned all the dials in the same direction that had turned the lights on. There was a distant clunking sound, then silence. Duck had her back against an inside door and was slowly leaning against it. The door was silently opening, pushed by her weight. Near noticed and turned so his back was against the other door. He slowly started pushing his own door open. When there was enough space, the two of them slipped through. Fran watched them with one eyebrow raised, then followed. Beyond the double door was a white hallway. Duck and Near looked up in surprise as Fran appeared, arms folded across her chest. Auntie Fran, Duck hissed and ran up to her. We pushed on the door and it opened. The hall door's open. Near leaned over and pushed on a closed side door. It swung in slightly and then popped open outward with a click. A black cavern of space loomed inside it. Fran lit her torchlight and shone it in. The room was simple, with a small rectangle rising from one part of the floor and several indented areas on the walls. There were no windows and no source of light. Was the door open when you came in? No, I pushed on it and it popped open. Duck went to the next door, but Fran stopped her before she could push on it. Hold up, Duckaroony, let's think about this. Rooms that open only if they're pushed inward from the outside. That seems a bit dangerous and a bit odd. We don't know that they only open if pushed from the outside, offered Near. We need to go inside and check to see if we can get out. Fran nodded. You're right, but we're moving into dangerous waters here. Before we head any deeper, let's get the rest of our fearless explorers in here. Fran went to the hallway entrance and poked her head through the doors. Hey, slackers! Come on, we have mysteries to solve. You can catalog decrepit machinery later. There was the sound of laughter as well as protests, and people started moving into the hall. I thought you said the doors wouldn't open, said Maggie. They wouldn't last time we were here, but look, they swing open if you push on them. Duck demonstrated by pushing on another door. Urit shone his torchlight in one room, then another. Everyone spread down the hall, pushing on the doors, shining their lights into them after they popped open. David, spot me for 20 seconds. I want to see if the doors open again from the inside. Fran went into her room and David shut the door. In 20 seconds he opened the door. Fran came out. Could you hear me? I was shouting to see if it was soundproof. There's some sort of embedded light in the ceiling that comes on once the door was closed. There's no way to open the doors from the inside. Couldn't hear a thing, said David. What do you think those rooms are? Cells, said Ellanen. I think these are prison cells. Basic furniture, no way out, no windows, all the same. I think we're in a prison. The hallway grew silent as Ellanen's words sank in. Fran moved quickly, heading back into the main hall. Get everyone out of the rooms. I'm shutting down all the dials but the lights. These rooms are an accident waiting to happen. She disappeared through the doors, and after a moment there was the same clunking sound they had heard earlier. Duck reached out and pushed a door, but it remained shut. Well, that was fun. Shall we explore further? David headed down the long hall, and everyone followed. After a while, the corridor curved to the right in a graceful arc and appeared to be sloping slightly uphill. The doors stopped appearing on both sides of the hall, and the walls darkened in color. The group arrived at a pair of metal doors that looked old and pitted. The musty smell in the air was thicker here, and several gristle tied cloth masks around their faces. Let's get the defense team up front, said David. Several visitors came forward and went black, slipping their skin suits up over their heads. Maggie and Fran went into phase. David reached out and pushed one of the doors. It swung inward slightly, but he had to push hard to make it open all the way. The room beyond was massive and seemed carved out of stone. It was filled with machinery and aisles lined with blinking lights angled in different directions. The air was filled with hisses and clicks, machines purposely working on their tasks. The space was dome-shaped, with the arching ceiling hung with screens and panels showing images of the surface of the planet. Around the edge of the room were sets of doors like the ones they had just come through. Still in phase, Fran ran the circumference of the room and counted 8 pairs of doors in total. She sat down in front of a big machine full of dancing lights, waiting for the group to finish filing in. Maggie came and sat down next to her. There are 8 sets of doors, signed Fran. This place is huge. The machinery's familiar, though. It's the same type of stuff that was back at Burston when we were brought forward. Maggie looked worried. You okay? Not sure. So far the place has been empty, but what if we're just in a spot where they're not? Fran frowned. The Galactic Council seemed pretty sure that all the Thridians were dead. I think we should have the defense team take it from here, said Maggie. There are too many people here right now to protect if things go south. Fran nodded. Maggie was right. She thought about it for a moment more, then got to her feet. What an idiot she had been, traipsing down here with the children, then bringing everyone else. She pulled out a phase and looked around for David. She spotted him over by a bank of monitors, their screens dull black like lidded eyes. She walked over. David, she said softly, we need to clear out, sooner rather than later. These machines are obviously still operating, and clearly Thridian. He nodded. I agree. Let's round everybody up and get them out of here. David looked around and shuddered. It smells like them. Fran took a deep breath in and then swallowed hard. Yeah. She moved silently from person to person and the word spread. The entire group left the room quickly, quietly withdrawing. The lights of the Thridian machines continued to blink and dance, as if waiting for their master's return. Thank you for listening to Ose, Book 2 of the Visitor series. Ose was written by Pamela Zero. This podcast was recorded and edited by Pamela Zero. The song Ghost was written, sung, and produced by Pamela Zero. Background music is called Insight, and it's by Megan Wofford. Ose is available in paperback on Amazon. Please be sure to like and subscribe and visit thevisitorseries.com for more info. Thanks, everyone. I'll talk to you soon.